Parshas Noach. This week's Parsha introduces, actually last week's Parsha introduced Noach, but didn't say much about him. This week's Parsha says a lot about him, and it introduces him as follows. Elad toldos Noach. These are the offspring of Noach. Noach ish tzaddik. Noach was a righteous man. Tamim haya b'dorosav. He was perfect in his generations. Es ho'elokim hisalech Noach. Noach walked with God. Question. In this verse, what does the word bidorosav add? In his generations. What does that add that we wouldn't have understood otherwise? The verse could have said, and I'm going to skip that word, bidorosav, in his generations. It could have simply said, Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya. Noach was a righteous man. He was perfect. In his generations is a modifier. It tells us something. What does it tell us? Well, Rashi doesn't ask the question, but he gives an answer. Rashi frequently, the super commentator on the Torah, he frequently gives the answers without articulating the question. And sometimes the challenge is to figure out what Rashi is answering, the question that Rashi is answering. That's not a problem here. What does Rashi say? B'dorosav, yesh me rabosenu dorshim oso l'shevach. There are those among our rabbis who expound on this. They extract praise. What is the praise? Kol shekain, ilu haya b'dor tzadikim, haya tzadik yoser. How much more so, had he lived in a generation of righteous people, he would have been even more righteous. In other words, b'dorosav is a qualifier to say, as it were, even in a generation as evil as the one in which he lived, the one in which the Almighty determined that no one except for Noach and his immediate family was worthy of continuing to live when the Almighty wiped out the entire generation. So if all of the rest of his co-dwellers on earth were evil, and nevertheless he remained righteous, had he been in a righteous environment, how much more so? Okay, that's view number one. What's view number two? V'yesh dorshim oso lignai. There are those who use this to extract criticism of Noach. Lefi doro haya tzadik. This is a relative evaluation when the Torah says that he was a tzaddik. What does it mean he was a tzaddik, a righteous person? Relative to his generation, he was a righteous person. V'ilu haya b'doro shel Avraham. But had he lived in the generation of Abraham, lo haya nechshav leklum. He would have been considered as nothing, insignificant. Now that's remarkable ends of the continuum over here. On the one hand, some say he was so righteous that had he been in a generation of righteous people, he'd have been even more so. And others say that had he lived in the times of Avraham Avinu, of Abraham, he wouldn't have been significant at all. Now, there are those who suggest that it's really not a contradiction. Different environments present different challenges. And it could well be that a person who withstands societal pressures can end up exceeding the norm and accomplishing great things that the rest of his cohort or peers do not accomplish. But in specific generations, they may not succeed. So let's look a little bit deeper. What exactly would have been the challenge for Noach had he lived in the generation of Avraham Avinu? So there are those who say that the notion of, and you could even ask, why do the rabbis go out of their way to be critical, or at least those who do, go out of their way to be critical of Noach? Why don't you leave the guy alone? Just say, okay, he was a tzaddik, he was a righteous man in his generation. Leave it alone. Why do you have to go out of your way to point out a shortcoming on the part of Noach? So there is a medrash. There are those who say that, well, what was the difference between Noach's generation and Avram's generation? Well, we know that Avram and Sarah, even when they were Avram and Sarai, they were very effective at persuading people to abandon their avodah zarah, to abandon their idolatry, and to serve the Almighty. They were they brought, according to Chazal, Avraham worked with the men, Sarai worked with the women, and together they brought men and women, entire families, tachas kanfei Shechina, under the wings of the Almighty, meaning to recognize God and to abandon their avodah zarah. We see that nobody else was saved in the time of Noach. We see that there were no additional passengers on the ark other than Noach and his immediate family. So in that sense, one might claim that although Noach was a righteous person, he did fall short in that there is always a challenge to be mekarev, to bring closer those who are distant from the tradition, and to attempt to be a positive influence for their benefit. And apparently, Noach failed. Now, is it because he didn't try? Is that what the rabbis who are critical of him are suggesting? So Rabbi Yaakov Kaminetsky cites a medrash in Parshas Rabbah. It says that Noach haya mochiach es bnei doro. Noach used to chastise the members of his generation. V'omer lahem, and he would say to them, Reikim atem, what empty individuals you are, foolish people. Menichim mi shekolo shover arazim. You're abandoning or leaving alone or not having a relationship with someone whose very voice can shatter large trees, cedar trees. U'mishtachavim le'etz avesh. And what do you bow down to? What do you serve? You serve dry pieces of wood. You make these idols that are completely impotent. They have no power whatsoever, and you serve them. What are you doing, you foolish people? Why don't you serve God? And he wasn't successful. So Rabbi Yaakov examines, why wasn't Noach successful in his attempt to persuade people to abandon Avodah Zarah? And his answer is based on a Gemara in Sanhedrin, which says that whenever the Jews abandoned God and went to the Avodah Zarah, went to idol worship, strange worship, foreign worship, it was generally not because they believed in the Avodah Zarah, but because they understood that if they cling to a different belief system, then they'll be free to do whatever they want. Especially, they'll be free to engage in all kinds of licentious and immoral behavior. If you subscribe to a code that says that this behavior is not permitted, then you're an outlier, then you're an outsider, then you're a transgressor. But if you subscribe to an ideology that permits freely engaging in all manner of corruption that the Torah prohibits, well, the only thing you've done is you violated, the rationale would go, you violated abandoning God and serving Avodah Zarah, incidentally, not a light matter, a very, very severe matter. But at the end, you get to, free of criticism of your fellow ideologues, you get to engage in licentious behavior. It's a trade-off that many, many people made. So Chazal say that the reason many Jews abandoned God and went to Avodah Zarah is because they wanted cover for engaging in immoral behavior. What was Noach's problem? Noach's problem was he was criticizing the people for engaging in a behavior and said, you're foolish because you think it has power. It doesn't have power. The truth is, says Rabbi Noach, says Rabbi Yaakov, they didn't believe in the Avodah Zarah, but they wanted their lifestyle of corruption. So they promoted a foreign ideology so that they could engage in that. So Rabbi Yaakov says, so Noach didn't get it. What do you want from him? You're going to say that he wouldn't have amounted to anything in Avram's time? So he was a tzaddik. He wasn't a relative tzaddik, argues Rabbi Yaakov. He was an absolute tzaddik. He just wasn't a chacham. He just didn't know enough to talk about the essential issue, which is licentiousness. He should have spoken about licentiousness and about how it's immoral and about how it'll come back to bite you. And there are all kinds of terrible things that come about as a result of it. All manner of arguments that he could have adduced to persuade people, but he didn't. He went for the superficial. So Rabbi Yaakov says, okay, he went for the superficial. Doesn't mean he wasn't a tzaddik. It just means he wasn't a chacham. It means he wasn't wise. And Rabbi Yaakov says, a tzaddik has to be wise. And if he's not a tzaddik. What does that mean? He says a tzaddik has to be mavakesh ha'emes. A tzaddik has to seek out the truth. And he has to pound away at it until he discovers what's really going on. And if people are serving Avodah Zarah, but their real issue, their real goal is not the Avodah Zarah at all, but rather it's to engage in immoral behavior, then don't talk to them about how the Avodah Zarah is impotent. They know the Avodah Zarah is impotent. What you have to talk to them is about their behavior, what's problematic about it, how they can improve themselves, and how they can get to a better stage in life by following the Torah, as opposed to following the Avodah Zarah. In the end, Rabbi Yaakov says, the deficiency in the righteousness of Noach was not in his own personal conduct, but rather in his inability to connect to others and to be able to see what is really motivating them. We see that an essential element of living a righteous life is knowing what motivates others and being able to speak to their motivation. With blessings for Klal Yisrael in this very stressful time, for refuah shalema to those who have been injured, for nechama for those who have suffered losses, and for blessings for hatzlacha, for victory, for the powers, for the soldiers, for Tzahal, and ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give us the strength to overcome this and to bring light into the world. Have a good Shabbos.